Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In this clip, Bishop Barron is giving an impromptu homily, I guess you could call it. He had a 45-minute lecture prepared, and the event organizers basically said, "You don't have that much time. You actually have just a few minutes." So I always find that Bishop Barron is best in these scenarios when I've seen it in other clips. So I haven't watched much of this. Let's see what he has to say.
Thank you. Hey, listen, I got very good news for you. I had prepared about a 45-minute presentation, so just very casually backstage, I said to one of the organizers, "Well, so I'm going to go for about 45 minutes," and her face kind of went white, and she goes, "You have 18 minutes." So I now have 15 minutes. I'm noticing. So you're going to get a little portion of my talk, if that's okay. One thing I'm not going to talk about at all are the statistics about the nuns, the NONES, all the people today who are leaving organized religion. I've written a lot about that, spoken about it, so go online, you can find all that. The statistics are depressing. The one that always stays in my mind is that among young Catholics under 30, now fully 50% identify as nuns, as having no religion. So we got our work cut out for us, and you all know that. And I'm not going to go into more sociology with you. What I want to do in the brief time I have is talk about the Acts of the Apostles. So whenever I think about evangelization or the mission of the church, I think go back to this great biblical text that gives us the template that sets the agenda for us. And that's the Acts of the Apostles. I'll just say a couple things now in the time I have. Here's the first thing to notice about the Acts of the Apostles. It tells us, everybody, very clearly who's in charge. And what I mean here is the ascended Christ who now commands his church. So listen how this second volume of Luke's great masterpiece begins. He reminds his friend Theophilus, we're not sure who Theophilus was, but he says, of everything that Jesus initiated, both as practice and teaching, until the day he was taken up, having issued instructions through the Holy Spirit to the apostles he had chosen. That's the whole church now, if we attend to those words. What's our job, everybody? It's simply to continue doing what Jesus did and speaking what he spoke. 2,000 years ago, the Logos takes to himself a human nature. It's the incarnation. But now the risen and ascended Christ takes to himself a mystical body. Where his hands and his feet, his eyes, his tongue, his speech. And our job is to do exactly what he did and to speak what he spoke. And this is why it's very important that the very first thing that Luke tells us about in Acts is the ascension of Jesus. Now, here's the trouble with the ascension. A lot of us think of the ascension as Jesus going up, up, and away, right? Now, some in this room, probably very few, are old enough to remember this old pop song called Up, Up, and Away. But that's precisely how not to understand the ascension. As though Jesus now has gone away. Goodbye, Jesus. No, rather think of it this way. The way in the pre-modern period, the way a military commander would go to a height so as to survey and command the whole field of battle. From that heightened position, he could more effectively command the troops. And so the risen Christ ascends and sits at the right hand of the Father, right? That's not just an abstraction. Sitting at the right hand of the Father, he's in the position of command. Through the Holy Spirit, the ascended risen Christ commands his mystical body, the church, to do what he did and to say what he said. That's it, everybody. That's the task of the church to the present day. Every one of you in some way has been sent by that commander, has been given orders to do the work of the church.
All right. So, one of the most important words that Bishop Barron is saying in the beginning of this speech is the word command. I don't know if you noticed it multiple times. He said it. And I think it's important to reiterate why he's saying it. I think oftentimes we can see what's going on within the scriptures and be kind of passing bystanders to the story. We like the story. We want the story for the benefits that it has for us. But as soon as we're commanded to do something, I don't think our culture likes being told what to do. And that's kind of what a command is. I think we can kind of shrink back a little bit and kind of fold if we're honest with ourselves. At least I'm trying to be honest with myself. Jesus commands us to do what he did and to say what he says. Um, and I think it's so imperative that we understand that because it is a command, it's something that we have to do. We have to walk as Jesus walked and we have to talk as he talked. Now, knowing Bishop Barron, I think he's going to emphasize the latter. He's really probably going to talk about how important the speech aspect is, especially in a culture that is built upon, false narratives within it and false belief systems. That makes the kind of the reasoning of the Christian faith alongside faith. So it's a reasonable faith, and therefore we have to talk and reason with people, kind of like Paul did at the Areopagus or Mars Hill. That is going to be essential. But then again, this is the point. It is a command of Jesus. I don't think I had ever really noticed that before. Like Jesus commands it. It's not just like Jesus encourages you to do it. He commands you to do it. So the question for all of us as we're listening to Bishop Barron here is, do we actually do that? Now, don't get too down on yourself if it's an immediate in your head no. The reality is that you've probably done it more than you realize. But are you also aware of the fact that you do that? And are you kind of like consciously aware of enacting the faith by walking how Jesus walked and talking how Jesus talked? Um, Again, I think it's always really important to kind of emphasize how this gets back down to us. And of course, Bishop Barron is saying here that we are the ones that go into the workforce and into those spaces. So we're the ones that are going to have to walk the walk and talk the talk there. Something to be thinking about. Let's continue.
Right after the ascension comes Pentecost. The ascension, something of earth now going into the heavenly realm. Pentecost, something of heaven coming down to earth. See, there's the church. Under the command of the ascended Christ, the church now brings the power of heaven to earth in a myriad ways, according to your particular missions. You bring something of heaven to earth, doing as Jesus did. Okay, now here's the one thing I'm going to talk about with you as we try to make this more specific. The church, under the command of Christ, engages in bold speech. Bold speech. So on the day of Pentecost, as the Spirit rushes on the apostles, the symbol of the tongues as of fire settle over their heads. And then they burst forth and they speak to the Jews who had come from all corners of the world. In fact, if you look at Luke's description, imagine Jerusalem in the middle, and then he describes people from various points, and they form a kind of ellipse around Jerusalem. The idea is the word going out now to all the nations of the world. You know, last September, Scott Hahn himself, the great Bible scholar, came to LA, where I'm based, and he gave a morning of reflection. And afterwards, he came to my room at the cathedral, and we spoke for about a half hour. And I was very gratified to hear this from Scott Hahn himself, that there's no historical ground for the claim that St. Francis said, preach always, and when necessary, use words. You ever hear that phrase? Preach always, and when necessary, use words. I've always had a kind of cordial dislike of that statement. And so I was very happy to hear that St. Francis didn't actually say it. Now, here's why. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I get it. I get it. You know, that our whole life should witness to Christ and our whole life should be a kind of preaching. I understand. But see, here's the danger, I think. The danger is that statement can be used as a justification for a kind of anti intellectualism. It can be used as a justification for a kind of pastoral reductionism. I mean, look, you know, what it really all comes down to is taking care of the poor. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all in favor of taking care of the poor. I'm totally in favor of it. But let's be honest. I mean, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Muslim, heck, even an atheist of goodwill can be devoted to the poor. My point is that in itself can never be evangelically sufficient. No, no, the church engages from the beginning in bold, fiery, coherent, confident, and intelligent speech. And listen, you know this, and if anyone's paid any attention to my work, you know this. This is not the time for anti-intellectualism in our church. This is not the time for anti-intellectualism in our church. We have lots of young people, you know them, they're your colleagues and friends, who are leaving the church for intellectual reasons. You know, that it's opposed to science, or it doesn't make sense, or it's old mythology. No, no, we need people, and I nominate all of you. We need people to have tongues of fire settle over their heads so they can engage in this bold speech.
All right, so be thinking about that today, just how important bold speech is. I'm going to go ahead and stop the sermon or the homily. It's not really that. It's more like a speech. It really is. He's kind of preaching though. To this crowd at a Focus conference. If you want to watch the full speech, the link will be in the description below. I've said it often on this channel, and I'll say it again because I think it connects to what Bishop Barron's saying here about evangelization and how evangelization necessitates giving good reasons for the faith, an apologia. That's why we do apologetics. But it means that you're going to have to speak. You're going to have to speak to people that aren't necessarily Christians. I was just with a group of Christians the other day, and we were having a discussion, and we were talking about the Bible. We were talking about church history. We were talking about theology, and this group really likes that. And I remember bringing up a little bit, a question of like, okay, now let's imagine what it would be like to talk to somebody who doesn't actually believe this, who actually would have objections um, to the Christian faith, and the entire group kind of went silent, kind of like they are in this crowd. You can hear them laughing, but it's amazing how this kind of cuts to the heart. Like, man, I really don't talk about Jesus to other people very much, and we can kind of feel convicted. And the reality is that we need to have these answers, and it's not just for a person like Bishop Barron who goes around the world talking about these things and with these types of famous people that are skeptical. It really is for us because they're everywhere. They're the nuns, and they're a growing group of people within our society. But this is what I often say. I didn't get to that, did I? It's that Jesus says, from out of your heart, your mouth speaks. So whatever you're speaking really reveals your heart. And your heart is like the center in biblical language is the heart. Your heart is the heart of who you are. It's the center. It's kind of the life source. You can think of it kind of like where it's the seat of your emotions. And your affections, etc. And so that's very, very revealing. If you're not talking about Jesus, that should alarm you a little bit. Like, really, what is the thing that is controlling my heart, my affections, and my emotions? Is it money, fame, possessions, pleasure, power? Power, all those different things that St. Thomas Aquinas talked about, that Bishop Barron often reiterates as well? Or is it Jesus? Because, I have found that people are really good, and I'm talking to myself here. People are really good at, citing all sorts of sports information. Like, I'm really good at that. Am I just as good at that as telling other people about Jesus? Do I have just as many Bible facts as sports stats? I think that's something that we need to be aware of and cognizant of. It's interesting how the room kind of went silent. And it's also interesting to me, like Bishop Barron probably had lots of sociology, as you mentioned in the opening. He probably had lots of good examples, but he threw all of that away in the 15 minutes that he was left with to preach from the Bible. And I think that that is exemplary, if I can say that word right. And I think that that is something that we can all learn from too. Many of us are not going to have 45 minutes, let alone even 18, or even get it reduced down to 15 to be able to talk about what we believe is important in life. You might only have 30 seconds. You might only have a minute. You might only have two. And what are you going to reduce it to? I think that that's kind of a good application. Find a good way to reduce what you think is most important about the Christian life. It's probably going to be a little bit of experience. It's probably going to be a little bit of what has persuaded you with the church. How can you reduce that to 2 minutes to be able to present it to somebody that has never heard the gospel before? And again, I want to encourage you. You probably don't even have to go outside your inner circle, your family, your friends, your colleagues, those who are closest to you, to find somebody that you could talk to about these things. And I want to encourage you to be bold in speech because it is the command of Christ to be so. All right, be thinking about that today. Bishop Barron was a little bit more challenging in this presentation, this sermon, this homily, and I think that that's ultimately what we have to take away from this clip. All right, remember that Christianity is Christ, and without Christ, there is no Christianity. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.